welcome back. It's time again to talk about my book club book for the month. Then she was gone. So we're now like 3/4 of the way through. Oh, this was such a good part. It was super hard to put down. Oh, so good. So good. So within this part, I feel like we got some confirmations of my theories that I had earlier about this story. That like Ellie would be kidnapped by her math tutor. I haven't seen everything that I was thinking, which I don't remember if I mentioned in the last video, but I was thinking that potentially they'd stolen her because Noelle couldn't have babies, which is basically true, but I was thinking that it was like a team effort almost between Noelle and Floyd, and that they would have like dyed Ellie's hair to pretend that she was Noelle. Why, I don't know, but I was kind of feeling like along those lines, and that's why Poppy still remembers her mom with red hair. But it could also be that she just never met Ellie and thinks Noelle is her mom, whereas Ellie really is her mom, and they just pretended that Noelle was based on what we saw in this part. So I'm still very curious to see how that all plays out. But yeah, there was at least some confirmation of theory because Ellie was definitely kidnapped by Noelle. Also within this section, it was super fascinating because we actually ended up getting some of Noelle's perspective, which I was not expecting to get in this book at all. And so that was like, ooh, what's gonna happen? And seeing it like from that perspective was really interesting, and I liked the way it was written, that she doesn't see herself as like super obsessive or anything, but she's clearly got some like obsessive compulsive behaviors going on, especially once she likes people and gets attracted to them in some form. Like Ellie, she really liked because she was her best student, her perfect student, so she was giving her gifts and things, and then Ellie says, let's stop being in this tutor relationship, and she gets super upset over that because it's like, oh no, this thing I've been using to cope that's been helping me feel better is going away. And in some ways Floyd felt like he was the same sort of thing. She read Floyd's book, then she went to a book signing, and then things just kind of kept cascading. Like she was like, I just have to be with Floyd, and she's a really weird and interesting character. I'll give you that. And also, I did say in my first video that I was frustrated by the switching perspectives, but that was mostly because I didn't like how Ellie's was set up in the past, where she was foreshadowing so heavily, like, oh no, if I'd made these different decisions the whole time, where obviously we already even knew that she was disappeared, so obviously some of the choices could have been made differently and done better, and all that sort of thing. But for a large majority of the book, we weren't switching back and forth between them, so now switching to Noelle and then eventually to a little bit more of Ellie, I like it much better in this context. Like, Noelle's perspective is just interesting to get, and getting Ellie's later in the story, I feel like works better for me than it was in the early stuff, because this later perspective is like the kidnapping stuff has already happened, so we're just kind of seeing her trying to cope with it, trying to figure out how to escape, and I find that much more interesting than like, here's my normal life, but if I'd made different decisions it wouldn't have turned into what it did, you know. So I think that was my biggest frustration with the early Ellie chapters, and we don't really get a ton of that here. So that was good. And I do like that even though we're getting some of like Noelle's perspective and stuff, we are still getting kind of some elements of, what's really going on? Because we meet some of Noelle's family in this section who haven't really talked to Noelle in years, but are still using her house that she seems to have raised Poppy in because Poppy remembers it. And it's so fascinating, and I'm so curious and wondering what really happened to Noelle as well as Ellie now, because Noelle has just kind of disappeared off the face of the planet. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. To jump into some other fun things with it early on in this section, because we read 23 through 37 or thereabouts. In chapter 24, after they've had their family dinner, Laurel talks on the phone with Blue, and Blue's like, I'm very suspicious of this Floyd. His aura was very off to me, and that kind of a thing. And I feel like that's a great, like, red flag just in general, to be like, hey, I'm not sure about this person. But it's great that for Laurel's personality, she can very easily brush it off and build suspense on our end, because Laurel's like, oh, I don't believe in auras and stuff, you're just being silly. And so it's a great way to kind of build that suspense, but also have a fairly believable reason why she would be ignoring the advice that Floyd might be kind of a crazy person, and that they don't really trust him and stuff, so that's really fun. I'm really curious about SJ telling the story that she saw Noelle and Floyd, and it seemed like Noelle wasn't pregnant, even though she was supposed to be like 8 months pregnant. And I'm curious if we'll get more background on what's going on in that story, because based on like hiding Ellie in the basement, the easy thing to assume is that Ellie's the one who's pregnant, and then Noelle pretends to be pregnant and all of that. So I almost wonder, this has just barely occurred to me, if what'll happen is that Noelle pretends that she's pregnant and it's really Ellie who's pregnant, and then Floyd finds it out, and so he does away with Noelle and pretends that Ellie is Noelle. That's my new theory. We'll see if that's anything like what happens, but that's kind of what I'm leaning towards. Like, it just barely occurred to me, but it kind of makes sense. And then it could lead into the things like we've dyed Ellie's hair, which was one of my other theories, and maybe even her smelling like chips and stuff, because she's been like living in a basement, probably being fed like junk food. But we'll see. We'll see. I'm very curious to see where the story is going from here. Very, very curious. But yeah, I think that's all of the things. Oh, one other thing, one final thing. In chapter 35, Laurel has been out on the town, and I think she was at Floyd's house. Anyways, she's been out and about a little bit. She looks across the street and sees a familiar man, realizes it's Theo, considers going to talk to him, and then waits. And then she sees Hannah with Theo, which explains so much of Hannah's behavior, that she's like trying to hide the fact that she's in like a relationship and that she's dating someone and all that. And I totally missed the reference or the idea, but she had gotten flowers earlier in the book, and Laurel had found the note for them, and it was signed with just T, and it didn't even occur to me that Theo starts with T, so it could have been Theo. But there's that. So it was even like alluded to, and I just completely missed it. So that was well done. I'm curious to see where that goes. Just basically, I really want to read the next bit. So we'll be finishing the book soon, and I'll have another update video soon. If you've been reading along, have any thoughts, questions, theories that you want to share, feel free to share them down below. That's all I've got for now. This is the Umlaut Harper signing out.